Welcome to the Greg Bennett Show. I'm your host, Greg Bennett, and today I have a delightful conversation with an old friend and peer, Ryan Bolton. Ryan is just doing incredible work in the endurance coaching world, and in this episode, Ryan discusses his journey into the world of triathlon and some of his regrets that he has for when he was an athlete, and his transition from being an athlete to a coach. And he shares how he works with each of his athletes and gets them ready for their respective goals. And he describes the incredible joy he receives when his athletes achieve and how that joy is far superior to any of his own career highlights, including the Olympic Games experience. Ryan is just so fully invested with each of his athletes and is doing everything he possibly can to make them the greatest. Now, before we go on, I want to take a moment to just say thank you to all of you for your support, your suggestions, your feedback. I totally appreciate every one of you, and I'm enjoying every episode and just have tremendous gratitude for each guest and for you for listening. Now, I hope you enjoy this one, and if you do, I'd love you to share it. Now, remember, success comes to those who endure just one moment longer. I'm so grateful for the continued support of the show from these incredible sponsors. You really do need to have these products in your life. Personally, I use each of them daily. Athletic Greens nutritional beverage, Hyperice recovery tools, and the glutathione supplement Continual-G. What I love about Athletic Greens is its simplicity. It's delivered straight to your door and it takes seconds to mix with water. It tastes great and goes down easy. And I know I'm getting the most comprehensive nutritional beverage on the planet in one quick drink. If you're looking for one product that has as much high quality nutrients in it as possible, then you want to consider Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is more than just a multivitamin and multimineral. It takes it to the next level, adding a daily dose of superfoods, probiotics, greens blend, and more to support the gut health, energy, immunity, and stress. And right now, Athletic Greens is giving you, my audience, a special offer on top of their all-in-one formula. You'll receive 1 year supply of vitamin D and 5 travel packs for free with your first purchase for additional immune support. Many of the population are vitamin D deficient, including myself. I focus heavily in getting in the sun throughout the day, but when I can't, I religiously supplement with vitamin D. Adding vitamin D to your daily routine is just a great way to support vitamin D production. So if you're looking to get more out of your multivitamin and invest in your immunity, energy, and gut health, then you'll struggle to find anything more comprehensive than Athletic Greens. Take ownership of your health today and receive comprehensive nutritional insurance, a free year supply of vitamin D, and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase by visiting athleticgreens.com/Greg. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Greg. Now, you'll hear me mention Normatec and Hypervolt from Hyperice in several of the conversations with my guests in this show. Many of my guests and I are using these recovery tools religiously. You really must have them in your house. Sit in a pair of Normatec boots at the end of a long day. Use the Hypervolt percussion massage device to warm up muscles and loosen hot spots before working out, or anytime you have a niggling injury. They're just so easy and they're so quick, and they work. Their vibrating foam rollers, thermal technology, and Normatec compression systems just help you warm up faster, recover quicker, and simply move better. Seriously, these products are the perfect Christmas gift for any family member or good friend. Get $50 off all percussion devices now, no code needed, and get an additional 10% off with code GREG10 at hyperice.com. That's hyperice.com, HYPERICE.com, and use code GREG10 for 10% off. I have a web address for all of my listeners who already know that 1, the human body makes the most powerful antioxidants on earth. 2, the master antioxidant your body cells make is called glutathione, and the human body needs glutathione to live. 3, the reason I'm addressing a select group of listeners with this web address is that once you see what these scientists in my hometown, Sydney, have accomplished, it'll blow your mind. Go check out Continual-G.com. Continual-G.com. That's CONTINUALG.com. Check it out and let them know that I told you about it. All right. Today's guest is a former professional triathlete and Olympian, and now one of the world's greatest endurance coaches. With a successful college running career, he made the move to triathlon and represented the USA at the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. And post-Olympics, had great success in the world of Ironman. Combined with his studies in exercise physiology and masters in human nutrition with an emphasis on stress metabolism, he has the perfect background for top-level coaching. He's coaching some of the world's greatest endurance athletes, including Ironman Ben Hoffman, who I had on the show a couple of months back, Boston Marathon champion Caroline Rotich, and young and up-and-coming triathlon star, Sam Long. He's the founder and head coach of Bolton Endurance and the director of the Harambee project, which is a group of elite distance runners in Sante Fe, New Mexico. And he's also working with USA Triathlon as a technical advisor. Just simply one of the great talents of the world of triathlon. We raced each other in the 90s, and it's been a long time since we've caught up. So welcome, and thanks for joining me on the Greg Bennett Show. Ryan Bolton, how are you, mate?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's totally awesome to be here. And man, your intro makes me sound way cooler than I think that I am. So thanks for that.
I always try and give you guys a little bit of a pump up before we start recording. I feel like it's a nice way to start. Where in the world are you right now?
I'm in Crested Butte, Colorado, kind of sitting in a little cabin in the middle of nowhere, which makes doing a podcast like this kind of an interesting endeavor, but seems to be working pretty well. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, no, I can hear you loud and clear. In my conversation with Ben Hoffman a few months back, we discussed you throughout. He's obviously a big fan, and I'm a big fan likewise of the work that you've been doing with Ben. And I was excited to get you on to learn how you're doing what you're doing, but also it's just been a long time, and I want to share some stories from our past. So thanks for coming back. I don't know when was the last time we actually caught up. It was probably Boulder, maybe 15 years ago or something.
Yeah, it has. It's been a really, really long time. I actually thought back on when you contacted me. I was like, man, I have a handful of Greg Bennett and Laura Bennett stories that I could share that might get you in trouble and maybe get me in trouble.
Well, I think, didn't you, Laura mentioned that you were living in the garage of McKeely Jones in where was she in South Sydney there for one season in 97, 98, and Siri Lindley, the three of you were all living with McKeely. Is that right?
Yeah, it was in the Sutherland Shire, and I think it was prior to the 99 season, so Australian summer and our winter, and McKeely invited me and Siri and Laura kind of all independently to stay, because she had just bought a house in Denali that was right across from the railroad tracks, And I showed up, and Siri and Laura shared a room, and McKeely, of course, had her room. It was a 2-bedroom place, and I got to live in the garage, which was really awesome in the Australian summer, and with all the bikes, and there was a little twin bed in there. And one thing that I remember about that was, it was pretty interesting because, if you know the triathlon world and you know McKeely's personality, Siri's personality, my personality, Laura's personality, it was quite the household that we had. But one thing that I distinctly remember is we would always get, because it's Australia, and you're right on the Royal National Park there, which makes it a brilliant place to train. But we would always have these big ass spiders in the house, and the girls, not to stereotype, but the girls would always freak out when these spiders would show up. And so I was the only guy in the house, so I kind of had to man up and be all manly and get the spiders. But so this one time I remember I would grab a bowl, and I was very nice. And, I wouldn't kill the spider. I would normally capture it and put it outside. I'd put it in a bowl or something. And I remember this one because it was pretty distinctly big and ugly. And a couple weeks past this, and I don't know if Laura would remember this, but I was at the visitor center at Royal National Park, and they have all these spiders in resin, kind of on display. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, hey, that's that spider that I captured a few weeks ago. And the guy at the gift shop was like, oh, mate, he's like, that thing's incredibly poisonous.
It's a funnel web, probably, or one of those.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, I just put it in a bowl and threw it outside. I thought it was totally fine. But apparently in Australia, there's legitimate fear when you have spiders in your house to get rid of them.
Yeah,
But
you don't
pretty good
capture
memory.
you don't capture your own spiders and snakes in Australia. You don't go near them, mate. Firstly they jump a mile, and when they get you, they're going to do some serious damage. But I know
Right.
I for one, I grew up in Sydney, so you always hear these stories. Australians, you got spiders and snakes everywhere you go. Honestly, when I grew up sort of in a town right on the harbour, and it was pretty built up over the last 150 years, so we really never got to see too many snakes and spiders. But I think where you are down on the Sutherland Shire there, you would have had plenty. But I mean, Laura's often dropped your name in that time in sort of '98, and you did the Grand Prix, didn't you? You did one season of the Grand Prix, the Australian Grand Prix.
No, I didn't. That's a huge regret of mine, because Laura was doing it that year, and I think Siri was doing it as well. And honestly, I don't think I was invited to do it. I think maybe if I would have been, or if I would have pushed and asked, I could have done it. And for me, I was treating that time there as like basically a base season to get ready for the upcoming, World Cup season. But like in hindsight, I wish I would have done that Grand Prix. I think it would have made me a way better draft legal racer. I mean, the amount of experience that you guys got from racing that series was just immense. I mean, it was such a cool format, and and like I said, the experience that you got. Plus, at the time, that series, as you well know, like the best guys in the world were doing. I mean, you stepped on the start line there. It was like being at a top level WTS race. I mean, it's pretty hefty.
Yeah. Well, I think it was I just had Chris McCormack on, and we were discussing my career and our career, if anything, together, and how the Grand Prix and the whatever you want to call it, Formula One Grand Prix, whatever they call it these days, and how that really launched a lot of us onto the world tour. And you would go to a race like Ishigaki, Japan World Cup, and you're coming off the Australian summer of racing, and you'd get off the bike, and all of you who'd been doing the series just took off like madmen, and away you went. And it was really the top 15 guys had all been doing the series. And I think that just projected us all onto the world tour in a way that we've never seen before. And it's one of the things that I've been really pushing every federation I talk to these days. I'm like, guys, you got to get racing. You got to race. You got to learn to race more often, and especially that short format for the Olympics really put us in good stead going forward.
Yeah.
I think it was definitely a series that made a lot of careers. We were those young guys that got to have that and get going with it. So but anyway, enough of that. Let's get back to you. And these days, I had Dr. Dan Plews on. I don't know if you know Dan. He's
I know who he is for sure. Yeah,
a wonderful guy, doctor of exercise physiology and Ironman athlete in his own right. And he's actually training with a lot of his athletes that he's coaching. Are you doing that these days? How's your fitness level?
That's a great question, and maybe something to ask Sam Long or Heather Jackson or Ben Hoffman, because they love to push me at my limits. I used to run with my East Africans all the time, but I can't run much anymore. I have a hurt knee, which I have no idea how I hurt it, probably from skiing or something, but that kind of keeps me from running. But I'll still swim and I'll still bike and everything. And I get out with those guys and everything. And Ben's always, we kind of joke about it, and those guys all joke about it, is they're always trying to drop me, So go on rides, and he's always like, it's like, I'm not sure. In fact, I went Nordic skiing with Sam Long the other day. And in the middle of the ski, and this is very Sam, he was like, "How old are you?" And I was like, 47. And he's like, "Maybe by the time you're 50, I'll be able to drop you in these things."
No way, mate.
I'm not rock star fit, but honestly, I mean, of course, if those guys are like pushing hard, like they could drop me in 2 seconds. But I mean, I try to stay fit enough so that I can at least do, a ride with them and, get out with them and everything. And actually, for me, this is like a weird thing to admit, but I would say with like top level female pro triathletes, like that's probably about where my limit is. So like, for example, going for a hard ride with Heather Jackson is a really good workout for her. And it's a really good workout for me. She can put me on the ropes, but I can kind of maybe put her on the ropes too. So it actually is fine. Whereas like, once again, with my top level pro guys, like, of course, if they start throwing down power, like I'm off the wheel instantly. But I try to stay relatively fit. But with coaching, it's kind of always the priority, obviously, to not, be on the bike. And that's what I actually can usually gauge my level of fitness based on, or how busy I am with work on how low my level of fitness is. It's normally directly correlated. So yeah, when I start feeling a little bit hefty, I know that I've just been maybe working a bit much and not training, but maybe that's a good thing. So yeah.
Well, I think when I had Ben on, he was celebrating he was really praising your ability. He's like, yeah, that guy is just incredible athlete in his own right, So I think you have measured up to him. The fact that you're even sort of, matching with Heather Jackson, and it's you're probably only looking at a 10% drop off, from elite men to elite women. So I'm pretty impressed with that, buddy, because myself, I just turned 49 and it's getting harder and harder. And like you, I think it becomes a priority thing. It's like for me these days with 2 little kids and everything, it's okay, I got 40 minutes in the morning to do something. What is it?
Yeah, right.
And it's like, okay, how do I be as specific as possible? And it might be doing, some heavy weights, or it might be just jumping on the treadmill and doing 45-second VO2 max type things, or whatever it is. It's like, okay, you don't have much time, just do the best you can. And for me, it's just avoiding dad bod as long as I can. Once the kids get a bit older, and maybe for my 50th, I'll try and do something a bit more adventurous and a bit more of a challenge. But
that's right.
At the moment, it's like just keep moving.
We can have an old guys triathlon here in a few years.
Oh, mate, not when I look at the talent of some of you guys. It's not fair. I just, and on that, I want to kind of wind the clock back with you, because I think let's go right back, because you've had quite the journey and quite the education along the way, and all your experiences added up. Tell me, when did you get into the world of endurance sport? Because you come from Wyoming or somewhere, don't you? A small town in Wyoming.
Yeah, exactly. Which is pretty much the endurance sports capital of the world, if you think about it. So, well, honestly, the good thing about being from Wyoming is that there's a lot of wide open spaces. And, another Wyomingite who is big in the triathlon world is Barb Lindquist. And I know you know Barb. And, but there's a lot of wide open space. The other thing, I grew up in a town it's oil and gas country. So it's a very small town, but we actually had the tax revenue generated from oil and gas development was so much that the town that I grew up in had a 50-meter state-of-the-art indoor pool, which I know you're from Australia, 50-meter pools are a dime a dozen, but, in the States, they're not. And in Wyoming, they're certainly not. But as a kid, you just don't realize, like, for me, it was normal, to have this really nice indoor 50-meter pool in a small middle of nowhere Wyoming town. But I didn't realize how unique ultimately that was, like, just even in the United States. So I actually had a pretty neat infrastructure. But I was competitive in swimming and running, at a young age. I ran and I guess almost swam well enough to get college scholarships. I did not want to swim in college. Laura, she can probably speak to that. I felt like swimming in college meant like 4 years of being a zombie. So, and that did not appeal to me. And she may say that is the case. I felt like, I was like, yeah, swimmers, like, you just never see the sun. And, but anyway, so yeah, I went to school for running, but when I guess another fortunate thing, and especially for the United States and being from a rural area, there were a couple local triathlons, like from maybe my age of like 12, which is, the later 80s, which is really, kind of the forefront of the sport. So that I popped into, and, being that I had a running and swimming background, and I rode my bike, everywhere as well as a kid, it was kind of as a neat opportunity to pop into it. And then when I was in college, and, I don't know if you know this, and there are a lot of funny stories about this. And I ran my freshman year. After that year, I had an opportunity to, I was living in Boulder, actually. My best friend ran for CU, and I was working at Scott Carpenter Pool. And I know you know Scott pretty well, probably. And I would swim on my lunch breaks. I was training for cross country, and but I wasn't racing triathlon. And one of the many pros, even back in those days, this had to have been 92 or 93. He said, "Hey, you're a pretty good swimmer, but you look like a little runner guy." And I was like, "Yeah, I actually have this background." He said, "Well, you should do, the national championships in triathlon." And I went, this was 92 actually. And I was like, okay, when's that? And he was like, it's in Cleveland. And I went and showed up for that. And it ended up like, I ended up winning. So for, the US national championships for juniors, and they were like, hey, who are you? And you get to go to Muskoka, Canada in 3 weeks to go to the world championships. And I was like, that sounds really cool. And I show up in Muskoka like as green and naive as can possibly be, and got my ass handed to me. I just totally got my ass kicked. I think I was like 28th place or something like that. I had no idea what hit me. But I told myself, I was like, I got one more year of being a junior. And so the next year I redshirted my outdoor track season so that I could actually get on the bike, prior to June 1st. And I made the U.S. national team, and that was the year that Worlds was in Manchester, England. Mm-hmm. And I ended up getting second place, and that was a big year. I remember I ran into Crowe, every once in a while, but I remember he asked me, because he's such a scholar of the sport, and he was asking me in relation to what happened at Worlds that year. He's like, I've heard stories, because if you look at some of the old school, like McCormick was fourth in that race. Mm-hmm. Alexander Menzan was third. I was second. Like Norman Stadler was like eighth. Like there was,
he was fifth. Norman Stadler was fifth. Olivia Marceau, who was a world champion. The world titles that came from that junior race in 1993, the world titles over the next 15 to 20 years that came from that junior race is absolutely incredible. Andrew Johns, who won European champs many times. That's just an incredible field. Anyway, go on. I interrupted you, but it was incredible.
Well, so that was, but I really set my mind on that race, and I ended up getting second. Interestingly, I found out, and this was from Craig Alexander as well, is the guy who won was a Swiss kid who was an Uber biker, very, very strong cyclist. I was told, because I never heard of what happened to him. I assumed maybe he just went into pro cycling or something, because he didn't stay in the sport of triathlon. And Craig Alexander told me that he passed away like at the age of 21, like kind of unexpectedly. And I think it was like maybe a heart something. And I was like, wow, that is just shocking to me. But because he was kind of the only one, like you said, in that group that we didn't ultimately see later on. The good news was I got second at World Championships. The bad news was I went back to college a week later, and my cross country coach said, hey, this is fantastic. Like, amazing job. But he was pissed because he's like, I'm paying you to run, for the university, not to do this goofy, silly triathlon stuff. And I evaluated it. And I know, it's kind of a, like, to this day, I don't know if it was the best decision or not, but it was, back in that day, the kind of contracts that I could have got at the age of 19 to start racing professional triathlon were, maybe okay, but college was incredibly valuable, and a college scholarship, was incredibly valuable. So at that point, I just said, I told my coaches, and I told USA Triathlon at the time, I was like, I'm not going to race triathlon again until I get done with school, which ultimately was a great decision. It let me develop more as a runner. It's not like I quit swimming or cycling during that period. I just did it less. And then kind of coincidentally, I graduated right in 95, 96, which is exactly when they announced that triathlon was going to be in the Olympics. And so that was a clear doorway for me to jump back into the triathlon world.
It's interesting, isn't it? You've touched on so many things just there. Well, first we can kind of talk about the difficulty of the program that the US sets over here with the scholarships and the universities, because Laura went through the same thing.
Exactly. I remember that.
She had a swimming scholarship. She was a walk-on, but she got a scholarship with SMU. And then she went away during the summer and started running a bunch, did triathlons, and came back. And I think the coach, and I might get this quote a little bit wrong, but basically he said, look, you're too skinny. You've lost all your strength.
Right.
You have to stop. You have to stop this running business. We need to build you up and get your strength back for swimming. And Laura then had to put her blinders on a little bit and focused on the 100-meter butterfly and the 200-meter butterfly for SMU. And eventually, look, they won. I think in the relay, she won the NCAA championships and had a lot of success through doing her studies and everything else. But I feel like we still see that now with the USA athletes, that they're still juggling. Do I go all in this sport of triathlon? For many of them, they love triathlon more than the single sports. the scholarship program's starting to happen for the women, but for the men, they're still kind of going, do I just, do I single sport or not? I mean, what are your thoughts on where it's at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you know, I do work with USA Triathlon, or for USA Triathlon is my title there, as the performance advisor. And I'm on weekly calls with all of the team at USA Triathlon, the high performance team. And like you said, there's the pathways now for athletes. The good news is we have more pathways than ever. So like you said, you have women's NCAA triathlon, and that we haven't got like a bunch of national team level athletes from that yet, but I think inevitably in time we will. We have the collegiate recruitment program that's been around. And I mean, that's what Gwen Jorgensen came from. That's what a lot of our top athletes right now are from, both on the men's and women's side. And so that program, it's a great feeder because what it is, it's looking at people like Laura, people like me back in the day. If it existed, we probably would have been recruited by, that program that had great swim times or great run times, but also had a background in the other sports. And it recruits them into a program that then supports them post-collegiately, post their running career, post their swimming career, to go into the sport of triathlon. And I mean, that's, like I said, Katie Ferris has come from that program. Matt McElroy's come from that program. Morgan Pearson's come from that program. Summer Rappaport's come from that program. That's been really successful. And then, we have other programs now, Project Podium, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is more athletes which maybe I would have done, maybe a guy like you would have done. If I were approached my senior year, my last year of high school, and said, hey, you can go run in college, or you can go actually start your professional triathlon career and in college, I think I probably would have chosen that route. And so I think that's like a really neat opportunity too. One thing that you mentioned earlier that really stuck in my mind, where I feel like in the United States, developmentally is more challenging, even as juniors, but as young pros as well, is what you said, the lack of ability or accessibility to frequent racing. Like we just don't have that here. You just can't. The United States is big for one, and we just don't have that many races. If you're in Europe, I mean, the Europeans, I feel like their junior programs and their development of young athletes, like U23 athletes, they can develop so much on the race circuit, because every weekend, you can get into a Grand Prix race or, something high intensity, something fast, and something highly competitive. In the United States, it's just hard to do that. So, yeah.
No, I agree. It's one of the things that, I've had long discussions with both Triathlon Australia and the US over the last sort of 15, 20 years. And I've always led with race. And Miles Stewart, who's the CEO of Triathlon Australia, we agree on all of that. It's like, I don't want to see how fast you can swim in the pool. I don't care about your time. I don't care how fast you run on the track. I don't care. What I want to see is how well you do a triathlon against other people and mixing it up. And that to me shows not only can you do the three sports, but your passion for the sport and your desperation. And, I've enjoyed interviewing a lot of athletes this year or this past year on the show, many of whom didn't have as much talent as others, but their desperation, and they packed up and they went to where the racing was. No matter what, they were trying to find, where is the racing, and my back is against the wall. I have to be successful. Otherwise, I'm out of luck. But they went all in, and I can't help but feel sometimes if we're trying to hold their hands a little bit too much. The teenagers and the young 20s, I'm kind of like, get out there and get going. I'm looking forward to having Simon Lessing on the show in the next, few weeks. Simon, if you're listening, I'm going to be getting you on, buddy. But I love Simon's story. He's one of the greatest we've ever seen, and he basically back up against the wall and went on to win world titles and everything else. And I just I worry sometimes that we're holding hands and we're creating all these pathways where it's like just go race.
That is true. That is true too. Like you said, I mean, I think people, and I'm sure you've got this, especially in the last few years since you've retired, is, people often say, what's your greatest regret? What are one of your regrets or some of your biggest regrets, during your career? And I would say my number one answer for me is I wish I'd raced more. Like I really do. And especially the world triathlon style racing. I really, I feel like we didn't have the infrastructure once again to race so much like back in the day, like it had. And I wish that I would have like seen that light on my own, and I would have just went crazy. And that actually reminds me of another story with you. And I don't even know if you know this, but it was probably like in 98. It was my second year on the circuit, and I wasn't nearly racing as much as you guys were. And I really wish I would have, but Glenn Magnum approached me and said, and if you you guys, you had the New Balance team, and he said, "Hey, I want you to be on this team." And like, I was like, this would be awesome, because I knew you were on the team. I want to say Chris Hill was on the team.
Hamish Carter, Jamie Hunt.
Like, I mean, it was guys that, I was racing shoulder to shoulder with, but you guys were living the lifestyle. You were racing the circuit. You were doing what a lot of the athletes do. And I told Glenn, and I don't know if Glenn remembers this, and I haven't talked to him in many, many years, but I was like, I'm in, like, let's do this. But I couldn't. And because it was, I had a sponsorship obligation with Saucony. I had a contract with Saucony that permitted me, obviously, from being with the New Balance team. And I look at that moment though, and I really wish that I could have, because once again, I think that I would have drank the ITU Kool-Aid a lot more. And I mean, and honestly, it would have been like, I would have been probably living and training with you and Hamish and that whole crew. And man, I think the power of that would have been so good. And that's kind of a regret of mine. I wish that I would have dove in more in the racing standpoint and just embraced it all more. I think I probably would have been a better athlete. I probably would have had a longer career. I would have appreciated the sport more. I would have developed better. I mean, there's so many components of that, but now, yeah, you're right though. I totally agree, coming back to that, like getting athletes just head to head in races, getting that experience is probably the number one thing that you can do for any of them to make them better, and also to see their talent and to see, how talented they can be.
I don't think any of us leave our careers going, we fulfilled everything we wanted. And I've said it on this podcast a while ago. I remember running with Javier Gomez, and we were both running along and chatting about our careers or whatnot, and basically saying, "Oh yeah, I'd like to do that." Javier hasn't had a gold medal at the Olympics, but he's got whatever it's up to now, 9 world titles. He's got a silver at the Olympics.
Is that guy had
the guy has just won everything. But there was always this little bit like he felt, I'm missing out. And, my career at the same time, I was like, I didn't get to win the single day world championship. And I remember running with Peter Robinson, and he'd had 3 world titles and I'd had none, but I'd won 2 World Series, and we were both running along sharing our regrets or unfulfilled business, that we hadn't done. And it was like, it just happens. Do you know what I mean? It's like we do the best we can with the knowledge we have at the time, and we go about doing it. And hindsight is an awful thing to some degree, because you go, if I'd done that. But honestly, it's one of the things I've also chatted about in this podcast. I didn't have the ability to win. I hadn't learnt enough. I hadn't learnt how to win when I was younger, and that came a lot later for me. I was a very slow learner in learning how to win. And but I think, when I look at your career, it was reasonably short. It was kind of patchy. It was patchy. It was like this 93 second at the World Champs, Junior World Champs, which, for those that don't know, that was an Olympic non-drafting event. So it basically did require a hell of a lot of strength and endurance. And I think you did the fastest run split there by quite a way.
Yeah, I had either the fastest overall run split or second fastest.
Even the men, even the elite men.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. So you've burst onto the world scene at such a young age, going, boom, I'm here. Then you've gone, okay, I've got to go do my studies and get my scholarship. But then you've still come back and qualified for the US Olympic team for triathlon. Tell me about that, and how special was that? And then obviously the Olympic Games.
Yeah, well, it's every kid's dream. Well, not every kid's, but certainly people who live in the world that we live in, to make the Olympics and everything. So the moment that I heard, or that they announced that it was going to be, in Sydney in 2000, like it was a simple decision. I said, I'm going. That's my thing. It was, I had zero idea what that pathway was going to look like. Fortunately, Dan Empfield, who I know Dan Empfield too, he called me randomly out of the blue I'm just like sitting in my, crappy apartment in Laramie, Wyoming. And he said, hey, I talked to USA Triathlon today, and they asked me who was going to be on the 2000 Olympic team and people that I didn't know of. And they gave me your name, and I don't know who you are. He's like, but I just looked at your running stats, and he was like, I think you can do well. So he actually kind of took me under his wing and hooked me up. He was running and owned Quintana Roo at the time, and which was really neat. And he kind of got me going in that year. It was 1996 in the summer. So, and then in 97, I was able to start racing. And then in 98, I really started racing, the circuit with you guys. And once again, there was very little infrastructure for us on the circuit at that point. I remember my first race was Gamagori. And this is a really funny story. So this is 98 Gamagori. And I, through my massage therapist, who was Japanese, had got accommodation. So I flew into Tokyo, was picked up by Hideki. What's Hideki's last name? He's still involved with.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. I think.
Yes.
So Hideki picks me up. I stay in Tokyo with him and the team, which was so much fun for me. And then we went to Gamagori, and we show up at 10 o'clock at night at the host hotel. And I walk in and I was like, hey, I'm Ryan Bolton. I have a room here. And they're like, we have nothing for you. And and it was just like that, kind of crazy and chaotic. I was told that I had a room and I didn't have a room. But anyway, they found some room because someone had dropped out. And at that race, it was my first WTS race. And I guess they were called World Cups at the time, as you know. And packed up on the bike, there's maybe 20 of us on the bike. And I'm just hanging on for dear life and have no idea. And I take off on the run, and it was a 4-loop run. And on the first loop of the run, I just drill it. And I'm fully in the lead. And I remember Welshie was in the race, and I'm kicking Greg Welsh's ass right now. This is going awesome. And by lap number 3, it was game over. Totally. I'm an idiot. McKeely was there. McKeely was oh, I knew you were going to get absolutely smoked. I remember her telling me after the race, she was like, you're such an idiot, Ryan. Is of course, McKeely can tell you no other. But I ended up getting 7th at that race, and that was really good. And I guess it gave me the idea. I was like, okay, I think that maybe I can do well at this. And so whatever, over the next couple of years, I just raced the circuit. But you, super good term, it was really patchy. It's not like I was following the circuit. I was kind of racing when it was necessary, because I was also dabbling in, non-drafting Olympic distance stuff in the States, because there was a relatively robust circuit for that and ability to make money, which was kind of nice. But still full on, and then making the team. I mean, we had 2 opportunities that year to make the team. The Sydney World Cup was the first opportunity. And once again, I mean, looking back on this, I was a complete idiot. I didn't even go to that race. I was I'll make the team at the domestic, because the other race was a domestic race that they invited foreigners to. And I don't think you were there, actually, but
I don't think so. Laura might have gone, but I don't. Where was that one? That was in Dallas or somewhere, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Dallas. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was cocky or stupid, probably both. But I didn't even go to the Sydney World Cup to try to get a spot. Hunter Kemper got the spot there, and then I had one of the shittiest races of my life at the Olympic trials race. Though I had a horrendous swim. Got on the bike. The bike was horrible. And I basically just had to run my way onto the Olympic team. But it shows you the power of the mind, though. In my mind, there was no doubt that I was going to make the Olympic team. So I was going to do whatever it took to get there. But so I made the team, which was so amazing. I think, it's really special. It was one of those moments where I realized at the time, it's kind of hard to realize at that young of age, how significant it was, and ultimately how significant it would be to, race in the first, Olympic triathlon ever. But I don't think I appreciated it as much at the time as I do now. And once again, I think that's a hindsight thing. But and people always ask, what was the race like? And I think you could probably attest to this as well. It was just another race. You know what I mean? I just happened to be staging, underneath the Sydney Opera House with the 55 guys that I've been racing for the last 3 years of my life, it didn't really feel much differently, except for, the logistics and the hubbub of it and everything. And even the way, that the race went off and everything. But still, an amazing experience. And as you know, I mean, Australia, like just the Olympics in general, like they embraced it so much and appreciate it. People love sport there so much. So it's such a neat place to be for the Olympics. And also, triathlon, it's just, it's almost like, one of the national sports of the country. And so, people just love that there too. The women were on the first day of the Olympics. We were on the second day of the Olympics. And I mean, yeah, just such a special event to be a part of. Yeah. Like I said, I wish I would have appreciated it more at the time, but it's kind of hard to when you're in that moment.
I mean, throughout your running career, because you did have your own kind of running career during your college days as well. I mean, did you ever think, okay, running was potentially giving a stab at that at the Olympics? Did you think your times? I mean, I know your generation had people like Meb and Culpepper and a whole bunch of others in sort of your age group there. Did you, and you were matching it with those guys. Did you ever feel like running could have been it?
Yeah, I did. When I was, at the top of my running, I was, I was one of the top American runners at the time. I think what I looked at the time, and I mean, even Meb and Alan Culpepper, who you just mentioned, they were some of the best Americans, but they were not competitive at an international level. I think that's what I looked at. Like when I looked in the mirror, like I saw a triathlete and I saw my ability to maybe be one of the best triathletes in the world, but I didn't see myself, improving my 5K time by over a minute.
When you're down in the low 14s, you think you're running well, and then you're like, hang on, I'm still a lap behind on the track.
I'm like, oh, there's an 18-year-old Kenyan kid that just ran 12:52 or something. So that's exactly right. I mean, so I thought, you know what, like, I think I could maybe compete with the best in the world in triathlon. Plus, I mean, the other thing is, you're a triathlete. I'm built, more like you. Like I weighed, I want to say in college at my lightest, I was like 142 pounds. You can convert that to kilos, but
around 66 kilos. Yeah.
Right. And I was this scrawny guy, but like if you look at photos from me from like big races, national champion, like I look like I'm a linebacker,
Isn't it funny? I got a story on that. I remember I did the Beta Breakers running race in San Francisco many times. Got to know the race director very well, and he always flew me in and picked me up in a limousine. It made me really feel special. It was always a really fun race to do. Anyway, one year, I think it was 2003, I had my running going pretty well. I think I was down in the low 29s, and it was actually I was able to mix it with the East Africans, and I got to about 4 or 5K in. Up Heartbreak Hill, so it must be maybe a bit less than that. But
it's early in the race.
2 miles.
Yeah.
And I get to the top, and I'm still in probably that 5th or 6th spot, and I hear on the side of the road, "Who's the big white guy?"
That's right.
And then there's nothing that makes you feel a bit heavy when you run, when somebody yells out, "Who's the big white guy?" Mixing it up with all the East Africans. But I know what you mean. It's like you get as lean as you can, but you're never going to be quite that African.
Right. I wasn't going to be 125 pounds. And, I mean, I had swimmer shoulders and everything, but I did ultimately, that decision was completely based on where I felt like I had, more potential, but I also loved the sport of triathlon, and the idea of it. I mean, it was new at the time. Draft legal was new at the time, which was incredibly exciting to me. And I mean, I just loved the fact that it was 3 sports, the dynamics that created, the strategy that created, running. The thing that I love about running is it's incredibly pure, It's basically like put on a pair of shoes and see who can go the fastest. But, with triathlon, and I feel like now even more so than ever, like there's a significant amount of, just the fact that there's 3 sports makes it, somewhat complicated, but strategy, there's so much more strategy, and training, there's so much more. It's so much more dynamic, training for a triathlon. And I mean, even me looking at it from a coaching standpoint, working with a professional marathoner versus working with a professional triathlete, I would say, when it comes to scheduling, when it comes to race planning, when it comes to race tactics, it's 10 times as complicated for a triathlon than it is running, So, and that's one thing that I really loved about the sport, which is also, I think that, I saw my passion in the sport, more so than running ultimately. So it made a lot of sense to move into it as well.
I love that. I remember going to some of the running races, which I do around the US, and the runners would be like, "Oh, what laces are you going to put in?" They all had like these lightweight races, like the laces mattered to them.
Right.
And coming from triathlon, I was like, "Oh, are you serious?" Like, there's so many more things. What are you going to do? Exactly. I used to love flying to a running race with a backpack, a pair of shoes, and away I'd go. I love the simplicity of just going to a running race. But like you, my heart was always in triathlon, and I was a bit like you as well. When I was growing up, I looked at the East Africans and looked at the times of the world. I was just like, oh no, that's never going to be on the cards to be able to run with them. And even now, if I look at the young triathletes, like Chris McCormack and I were saying on last week's episode, they're running in the mid-13s for the 5K now. These triathletes, it's taken the sport of triathlon, and they're swimming faster than we ever did, and they're biking. It's actually incredible where the sport's, where it's going now. It's absolutely incredible. And then post Olympics, you then decided enough, and you went to Ironman for a little bit, and you had some success there. You did reasonably well. You won Lake Placid Ironman. You went to Kona a number of times. What was the thinking behind that? You were done with the whole Olympic movement, box ticked, or what was that?
Yeah, it was at the time. And like I said, this is kind of a hindsight 2020 thing. Is I feel like I would have stuck through Athens in 2004 if I, if I was like in a DTE, like if I would have been like on a similar team that you were on and everything. But two things came up. Is I feel like physiologically I am more Ironman oriented. Like the way that my body works it was more favorable to Ironman racing. I enjoyed Ironman training better. I liked, because I wasn't, doing the whole circuit, the idea of like doing 3 major races a year as opposed to doing, 15 and traveling around the world constantly was kind of appealing to me at the point. But I think I sat down with my coach, Joe Friel, after the Olympics, and he was like, okay, what's next? What do you want to do? And he felt like physiologically I was probably, had more potential in the Ironman distance as well, which to this day, I think I could have maybe developed, more into an ITU athlete. But regardless, this is the way that he put it. He said, in 4 years, I have no doubt that you could go to the 2004 Olympics. I don't know if he remembers this conversation or not. And he was like, and potentially win the race. He was like, but it's, it's World Cup style racing. It's ITU style racing. He was like, it's more of a crapshoot. And it is. He was like, he's like, I have no doubt in my mind, that in 4 years from now, you could go to the Hawaii Ironman and win the race. And I think like that, like made me think about it more. And, I was still young though. And that's the thing, I was like probably 26 years old, and I could have went either way, but I did choose to take the Ironman route. And I don't regret that. I did love the training for Ironman. I love the racing for triathlon, or for, the long course stuff. And, my first half Ironman was in 2001, and it was St. Croix. And this is, I remember I finished the race, and I can't remember who it was, but, one of the old school triathlon media people, the day before was Wildflower, and the guy, and I won in St. Croix, and I beat, a bunch of Ironman guys. And, Macca had won Wildflower the day before, and the guy was like, look at this. He was like, you Olympic distance guys, like, first race out, you do a half Ironman and you destroy everyone. And he was like, they have something to learn. And I think once again, we were kind of like on the forefront of that. The first generation of Olympic distance guys were like maybe moving up to that long course stuff. And you started seeing that. And now you've seen that story kind of repeated over and over and over again, multiple times with, people like even, Alistair and Javier and Cardano, of course, so many people. And, but yeah, and I think it kind of like stuck to me then too. Like I was like, wow, I can do pretty well at this, and I like the training and everything. And so, yeah, I stuck it out for, whatever, a few years.
A quick mini break. I really want to encourage you to do something special for yourself and sign up to Athletic Greens and get a free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase by visiting athleticgreens.com/Greg. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Greg. Hyperice now have a great holiday sale, $50 off Hypervolt and Hypervolt Plus, $400 off all normal tech packages, 20% off all other Hyperice tech, and the brand new Hypervolt Go is now available for $199. It's smaller and it's more portable. Hyperice.com. That's hyperice.com. HYPERICE.com. I think you've touched on a bit there, but just talking about some of the Olympic guys, I think we have a really good equal mix of Olympic athletes stepping up to true breed Ironman athletes that are really going at it. Because even if we look at 2019 Ironman World Championships, okay, Jan Frodeno did win it and smashed it. But then I look at Tim O'Donnell. He's a pure Ironman athlete. He did spend his time doing some World Cups and things, but generally he's a strong man. Sebastian Kinley, strong man. Ben Hoffman, who you coach, strong man. So you kind of look at that and go, the strong men Ironman athletes are still the ones turning up to Kona every year. And okay, Jan's come along and he has sort of changed it for the guys that have that Olympic background. But it's interesting. You know, we do have quite a good equal there. And you also mentioned, this is the thing I've always loved about it, that your physiology you thought was to Ironman.
Right.
But you loved the Ironman training. And that's almost the question when people go like, Greg, when are you going to step up to Ironman or whatever? I'm like, no, I know my physiology because I can answer what training do I want to do.
Right.
I don't even need to go get tested, right? I want to go do 10 by 3 minute efforts as hard as I can on the trails with 1 minute recovery. I want to go race more often. I don't want to do a 5-hour bike ride. I don't want to do, and you kind of go, well, that's why I stay to I believe my strengths and my talent was to stay short course because I knew myself just by knowing what training I wanted to do.
It's so funny that you say that because I say the same thing. I'm like, we have so many gadgets and so much potential testing, physiological testing, and all of that type of stuff. But I have a very simple way to tell you probably what type of racing you're best at. And I'll say that, to an age group athlete or a pro, so I'm like, would you rather go right now? Would you rather go run 18 miles aerobically? Or would you rather go do, like, I'll use your example, 3 by 3 whatever, would you say 3K or 3 minutes? 3K.
3 minutes.
Yeah. Exactly. If you want to do 3 by 3 minutes all out. And the guy who says, I want to do 3 by 3 minutes all out, short course group. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Done. Physiological test done.
Totally. Like, that's all you got to say. You know exactly where because to you, those 3 by 3 minutes probably felt good. It felt strong. And the idea of running 18 miles sounded like absolute torture. Whereas for a long course person, the opposite. 3 by 3 minutes sounds like absolute hell. And, whereas running 18 miles is like, oh, brilliant. I could do that all day long. So no, I totally agree. That's like a complete litmus test for, what you're good at. But yeah.
So, let's move on a little bit because I think we've decided how everybody should just test themselves these days.
Right,
it's easy done. When did that mindset come? Changing from an athlete to a coach and to some degree serving others. Becoming less about yourself and now about helping others. What was that transition like?
Yeah, it's kind of a multifaceted answer, and I guess the first thing like that stems or that I think about when you ask that is like most people would think that I quit racing early, which I did. I think I was like 31, 32 years old. And I had good contracts. I was racing well, all that stuff. I think, a lot of people were kind of shocked that I quit racing, including my coach. And I distinctly remember the day I was training in Arizona. I was actually living at my coach's house. And like, I was just, I said, I need to talk to you. And I sat down with him and I said, I don't know if I have this anymore. I just don't I'm going through the motions. Like I'm doing well. I'm racing well. I have great contracts. I'm making, relatively good money and, a relative in a triathlon term. I was no Greg Bennett by any means, but,
I wasn't, mate. Mine looked good because it was in prize money, but
yeah.
don't get me wrong. Yeah, it wasn't always fantastic.
Right. And, but, part of that was like intellectual stimulus, honestly. Like I think I was, as a triathlete, I always said, it's very selfish, as a pro triathlete, you have to be pretty self-centered. The focus is often on you with your peer group, with your family, whatever. But the other thing is I felt like my job was to turn my brain off all the time. And I don't know. I just felt like it wasn't stimulating me in that way. The other thing, kind of a second part of this, is that unbeknownst to me, and you mentioned at the early part of the podcast, my undergraduate degree was in exercise physiology. I had always promised, and I actually started graduate school before I left graduate school to start training for the Olympics. But I promised my professors in graduate school that I would go back and continue to do those studies when I was done with triathlon. But I was kind of longing for that. And I wasn't thinking like specifically, I'm going to set myself up to be, a top level triathlon coach. I wasn't really thinking that way. But when I look back on it, it was all really setting up to be that way. My coach, is one of the, most like famous, triathlon coaches of all time. He's a scholar of the sport. He knows so much, Joe Friel. I mean, he's written books. And Joe at the time, I don't know if he was consciously was maybe setting me up to be a coach, and really as soon as I did tell him that I wasn't going to race anymore, I was going to retire. And I quickly decided to go back to graduate school, which was also in, nutrition and metabolism and physiology. He started saying, hey, why don't you start coaching? Why don't you start coaching with me and the group and everything? And I thought, well, yeah, no, that sounds like a really good idea. And I think this is rare. And this is something that I don't know if we talk about like as professional triathletes or professional athletes as much. But that transition, and this very well, like, from being that professional athlete and having so much focus and so much drive, and so much passion for what you're doing, it's really hard to find something else that gives you that same focus, that same passion, that same drive. And I think it's a challenge for people. And I mean, you see it. And I mean, I know you have friends within the sport that have really struggled with that, and I have as well. And I mean, I actually think about it and talk with the pros that I work with now, even if some of them are, 15 years from retirement, about, being ready for that transition. But because it is hard. I got really, really lucky by having the guidance of Joe Friel, going to graduate school and having those 2 years to kind of get that stuff figured out, but also starting to work with people and working with some really good athletes early on, that it made me realize that like I was more passionate about their success or more passionate about coaching than I was even about my own results. For some reason, like to me, it was more gratifying to work with an athlete who had success than it was when I was successful.
Oh, I totally get that. Laura and I always talk about that. Her wins and her success always trumped anything that I ever did. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I know it didn't matter what I did. It was always like that partner, or even the few athletes that I did coach, Matthias Heck, when he got 8th at Hawaii, it was such a big deal. It was so tremendous that he broke through and got top 10. So I hear that. I know exactly what you're talking about, that feeling of serving others and helping others achieve their goals. It magnifies, doesn't it? It's incredible.
Yeah. And I guess I felt really lucky that I found that. And like I said, I wasn't necessarily looking for it, but I found it. And it's really rolled from there. And I'm just grateful every day that I get to work with such cool top level athletes and I get to see their successes and I get to be a part of that process and everything. Ben Hoffman, you mentioned, and I know you did, one of these podcasts with him somewhat recently. It's funny. He's a very cerebral person. And, he's really thoughtful. In fact, I had a conversation with him this morning, and it's never a quick decision with Ben. When you talk about stuff, it's always like, okay, we need to process this and give it time to process and everything. And I really appreciate that about him. But it's funny because when I first started working with him, and I've never had an athlete, a pro, do this before. He said, "What do you want to get out of this? Like, me working with you, like, what do you want to get out of this?" And I was like, "That's a great question."
Wow. Yeah.
I was like, I want you to kick ass. I want you to win. And he was like, but what else? And I was like, no, I was like, seriously, Ben, I was like, I want you to be the best triathlete in the world. And it's funny because I'd never really thought about that. Why, like, what did I want to get out of him? What did I want him to accomplish? What was in it for me? And, but it was a really neat lesson for me because it made me like sit down and think about it. I was like, seriously, that's what I want to get out of this. I want him to be the best athlete in the world. And it has nothing to do with, it's just purely that. Which is kind of a fun place to come from. So, yeah.
I love that because he actually in the episode, it was really one of my favorites of last year. Some episodes I walk away from and go, wow, they were really on, and Ben was on. And I, for one, by the end of it was like, yeah, this guy can win Kona. This guy gets it. He gets the physical, the mental, the emotional. He gets the importance of team and relationships. He gets all the pieces. He was there. He was there, and he was there in that point of his career, and he's in his late 30s now.
Yeah,
where he's had the experiences, he's had a lot of the life lessons through sport. He's had the roller coaster, the ups and downs. He's had all sorts of things, but he really felt to me he was truly taking control of everything that he could. And I left going, okay. I remember I always go back to Laura after the conversations and go, yeah, that one was good, or this one I could have done better, whatever. But I remember with Ben, I was like, yeah, this guy's got it. And he said, I think the same thing. He said, and Ryan's on board with me. We're in this together. This is my team, and we're going to go take on the world together. And there was something really powerful about the way that you both speak about each other. That relationship, that coach-athlete relationship, is one of the best I've seen. So yeah. I do think, I think your experiences that have led you all the way to this point, and we've still got to touch on quite a few of them, but your life lessons combined with Ben's lessons, it's like, okay, you guys know what it takes now. It's like, sure. Okay. Yeah. And not to say there's not going to be hiccups, but you get how to deal with all of these things.
Yeah, for sure. And, Ben, and I always say that about coaching, I feel like as technology continues to take over more and more and more in data, in analytics. And man, I saw a quote the other day and I wish I could recite it directly, but it says something about like, that data has replaced analytics. Analytics had replaced, like whatever, I can't think of it, but basically at the top of the spectrum is wisdom and like just knowing, and at the bottom of the spectrum is data. And I feel like so much coaching right now relies on data solely. And that's really a mistake. It's really a mistake to make because people are people and the data is incredibly important. It's incredibly important as a coach to understand the data. But what's more important is to understand the athlete and to have that relationship with the athlete. And I think that's a really big thing. And I guess that's one thing that I really try to create with my athletes. And like you said, there's always ups and downs and there's challenges. And, there's a fine line between being a person's coach and being a person's friend and all of that. But it's a complete teamwork thing. And I think that's another like coaching philosophy of mine is I like to create a relationship with the athlete where they feel good and comfortable communicating with me, their needs, their wants. And I'm totally fine with them, challenging what I'm doing because like I trust them to know their bodies. And, Sam Long is a good example. I mean, he's a kid, I started working with him when he was 22 or so. And, he just turned 25, but even him, a big part of the process with him is like me getting him to understand his body so that he can give me proper feedback on what we can do next. And I mean, for sure, I look at his stats and his data and everything, but, a big part of him is teaching him how to become independent of me, honestly, and I think to me, that's what really good coaching is. I see some coaches almost like create a dependency on them. And I'm not a fan of that. Like, I kind of like my athletes as they get older, as they get wiser, et cetera, to almost become more independent of me and more of a collaborator with me. And that's exactly what Ben Hoffman is. And it's a collaboration. I'm a member of his team. He's the CEO of his team. And, I'm one of the players. And I like to consider myself sort of at the top of the, or near the top of his pyramid, but it's a hugely collaborative effort. But Ben is incredibly professional, like the way that he approaches everything, which is really impressive. And in fact, it's taught me a lot about the sport, the way that he approaches it. And it's neat for me to have my younger pros with less experience spend time with them, because he teaches them how to be pro. Yeah.
Everything you just said then is just music to my ears. It's, I think a great coach is educating his athletes. It's to some degree, it's almost parenting, right? It's totally, I'm gradually getting you to 18 and then I want you on your own, but I'll always be there for you. Right, it's like, but I need you to take full control. And I've described it on this show numerous times, how I believe the best way to go is, you can have a couple of coaches along the way, and each one is almost like getting a degree. You're totally learning what you can from them. And you want to finish as a professional athlete, or any athlete, for maybe just having somebody as a consultant, somebody that you're bouncing ideas off, somebody that you can call up once a week and go, hey, what do you think? So everything you said there is just, man, I just think it's fantastic. And even the fact of talking about data, and Coach Cliff English, who I know you probably know as well.
Yeah, I know Cliff.
And we were discussing this same sort of thing, that look, there's a place for data, there's a place for science, but a great coach is always going to separate himself by the ability to share that data in a way with athletes that, it's an art, I guess. It really is that, exactly. That art, that ability to share with different personalities. They're all going to take on information differently. Dr. Tommy Wood, who I had on a few episodes ago, and we were discussing how DNA and genetics, it still has a long way to go, because basically the way that it works is either you are normal or you fail. And he said there's a lot to do with the negativity, an A-type personality can take it on and go, okay, I've got to work on taking more vitamin D, I've got to do blah, 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 and I can improve. But general people in society are going to take that on as, oh, I suck. Right. So there's, in terms of how we voice data, how we voice information to individuals is absolutely critical. I want to discuss a little bit, because, it was like I hadn't heard of Ryan Bolton for a number of years. And then all of a sudden, I hear that Ryan Bolton's this super amazing East African marathon coach and coaching these incredible athletes. That part of your journey, tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. A bit serendipitous, I would say, is when I finished graduate school, I started coaching, age group athletes. I had an opportunity. I moved to Sante Fe, New Mexico, and I had an opportunity. There was a group of East Africans training there. And, I was 34 years old, 33 years old. I was still running a fair amount. Definitely not competitively, but by a good friend of mine, I was introduced to this group of athletes, and the guy who was managing them at the time said, hey, I know that you coach people and you have a background in this stuff. Will you work with, some of these athletes? And he was like, will you coach them like part-time and just advise them? And I said, no. I was like, this is their job. This is their profession. You can't part-time coach someone. I was like, they're either on the bus or they're off the bus. And he was like, fine. And so I basically, maybe he had, a dozen people in town, and I sat down with each of them, and they were highly skeptical, because I was a triathlete, this white guy triathlete. Like, what the hell do I know about running? So about half of them, though, were like, okay, let's give this a shot. And so I started working with them. I mean, it was like basically completely, volunteer work. And like I said, at the time I was coaching, age group athletes as well. And, specifically triathletes, but I started working with them, and I created a really tight relationship with some of them relatively quickly. And it's like anything that I changed the way that they thought about racing. I changed the way that they thought about racing or training. The way that the East Africans treat at the time is they would get fit in Kenya. They would come to the United States. They would stay here for 6 weeks, and they would just race until they lost fitness and they couldn't race it well. And then they'd go back to Kenya, recharge the batteries, And I taught them, I was like, what you can do is you can come here. Let's periodize your schedule. Let's focus on major races. So let's not go to Toledo to win $500 next weekend, and then to Ontario, Canada, the next, weekend to win $500. And then I was like, let's focus on a few key events. And it was hard to get them to subscribe to that because they were addicted to getting those $500 paychecks as opposed to the $150,000 paycheck. But and just as a coach, philosophically, like, I'm interested in working with my elites. I'm interested in working with people who want to be world beaters. I'm not interested in, the person who, just wants to be, a working class, pro or something. I really want to work with people, because I think if I'm invested in them that much, I want them to be that invested in the sport as well. And like I said, I got some people to subscribe, and all it took was the success, of course, of, one athlete, pretty early on. And they're like, oh, this works. And that guy just made $20,000 in one weekend, which is way more than all of us made last year combined. And so then they're like, I'm on board. And, the person who has been with me since day one is Caroline Rotich. And I still coach her. I'm still incredibly close with her. But she's a really good example. She hopped on, early on there, and this was like in 08-ish. And I built, I guess over years, we built the relationship, and I built her up, to the point where, ultimately she won Boston in 2015. And at that point,
let me interrupt on that. Yeah. Let's hit the pause button. Let's not just jump over probably one of the biggest marathons in the world that every marathon wants to win. Boston Marathon. It's just anybody that understands running. It is the race to win. Okay, Caroline winning Boston 2015. How does it compare to your Olympic experience? Which is better?
Oh my gosh, by far, her winning Boston.
I love it.
By far. I can't watch that race because if I do, I get emotional. It's just such a powerful experience because the thing is, as a coach, and as an athlete, you went through all of the training and all of the experiences, but as a coach, you went through all of her training, all of her experiences, plus your experiences with her on that journey, And I think so it almost doubles the level of intensity or emotion or, gratification or, whatever you want to call it. So no, it's funny because when she crossed the finish line, fortunately, I was able to be there. What they do is this was actually crazy, and you'll appreciate this from an athlete standpoint. During the Boston Marathon, all the coaches and the agents are in a press room, basically watching the race. In Boston, they actually take us out to the start line so I can go out to start line with the athletes, and then I see them off, and then they shuttle you, back to downtown Boston. But anyway, then you watch the race. But maybe it had to have been with about 5K to go. It was down to 3 women at that point in the race, and they come into the room and they say, "Hey, if you're the agent," or they know who all of us are, so they're like, "Hey, Ryan, Caro's whatever top 3 right now. We need to bring you to the finish line." And this was the year after the bombings in Boston. So 5K to go, I'm on the edge of my seat because I have no idea what's going to happen. and they have to shuttle us from the Fairmont, which is right off of the square right there, to the finish line, which, I mean, it's maybe 150 meters, but because of the bombing the year before, and rightfully so, there was incredible amounts of security. And so the security was not going to let us through. And I'm just like ticking off like the seconds in my head because I have no idea what's going on with my athlete and so we get up and I'm with her agent and we finally we get through the security and stuff and all I can see is straight down, the main drag, the last Boylston there. And I see the big screen and her agent's like, what's going on? And all I can see are two, little girls, 400 meters down the line. He's like, is that her? And I'm like, I have no idea. And we look up on the screen and it's her. And she's kind of in a sprint finish with this Ethiopian woman. And, but from that perspective, from behind the finish line, especially when it's close finish, you have no idea what's going on, but it was so tense. Those 6 minutes and those couple kilometers that I didn't see at that point, I mean, was just so intense not being able to watch that. But then fortunately, and honestly, when she crossed the line, her agent's like, what just happened? And I was like, she won. And I mean, we almost didn't know what happened because we're just standing right there and everything. But anyway, I guess you asked about how did it feel or how does that feel compared to the Olympics is all I could continue. I just kept on saying, I'm proud of you, to her. I knew how much it meant to her and to her family and, financially, all of that stuff. It's such a big moment for them in their lives. So, but I mean, for me as a coach too, it was really great. But I can also tell you this as a coach, and it's kind of how we are as athletes. And we were talking about this earlier. The next thing that came into my mind was what's next?
Isn't it funny?
What's bigger than this? What's the current world record? I mean, you always want more, and you always want more success for your athletes, and you always want them to be better. And I mean, I think that's one thing that keeps me going as a coach is, you just always want your athletes to be, more successful. And I think it probably pisses them off sometimes when they're like, hey, coach, I just had an amazing race. I'm like, yeah, but you would have won by this much, you know what I mean? And it's for me, it's I always want them to do better. I always want them to, have more success and everything. And I think maybe I'm a hard coach that way because sometimes athletes have big successes and they feel like I'm not happy. And I'm like, no, I'm incredibly happy with you. I just know that you have even more in you. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think I've had so many guests on this past year where some of them said, oh, yeah, I won that world title, but I was so busy thinking about the Olympics or whatever. I didn't stop to truly appreciate and enjoy it, and that was one thing I got better as I got older, as I actually started going, okay, what I just did was whatever it was remarkable and incredible. And I need to give myself that time. And I got to the point where I'd just sit down in the basement for a couple of days and just let it sit. I didn't talk to anyone really. I just let it sit and really sink in. And that really helped me then go, okay. And I get to a point, 3 or 4 days later, okay, now what do we want to do? But it was kind of like, for me, I needed that time. And I think we're all different. We all process things different. Some people are incredibly driven and, there's never enough. But I got to the point of going, okay, that was pretty cool. Just let it sit in.
Yeah, I know. And that's great. And that's maturity, on your part too. You know what I mean?
How much more in demand are you as a coach now? Obviously, you've got Ben doing incredible things, winning South Africa Ironman so many times, fastest marathon split at Florida Ironman ever. His consistency at Ironman Kona and then with Caroline and Sam Long. Are you turning down athletes now? Or what's that look like?
Yeah, it's complicated because I have an incredibly hard time, saying no to people. And I guess the other thing as a coach is you see potential in everyone. So when people approach me about coaching, a lot of times that's, you kind of assess what is their potential? Who is this person? I mean, there's so many things to look at and everything. And I mean, once again, you can look at their data and all that type of stuff. But I think that I also need to assess, what kind of a person are they? And I mean, it is what we talked about. The relationship component is such a huge part of it that I want to know that the person that I'm working with is a person who I can have a relationship with and all of that. So yeah, I mean, I do, getting inquiries about coaching, I take all of those things into account. And of course, sometimes I say no, and other times I say yes. And, it's almost like, it makes it sound too dry if I say it's a risk assessment type situation, but it kind of is, but like I said, a lot of it to me has to do with also just the personality of the athlete and what I see in them and like as a person and what I see like as our potential growth, together in a coach athlete relationship and everything. But the other thing is, and I always say this, working with pros, like when I'm planning a season or planning a race or planning training, like when you're working with a pro, it's an incredibly intense relationship because as every I needs to be dotted, every T needs to be crossed. And we need to make sure that, every piece of fruit is being grabbed and that we're addressing every single issue. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of emotion. And, we talk about the highs of Caro winning Boston. I mean, that's an incredible high, but I feel those highs as much as I feel the lows of the athletes too. So, if they have a bad race or everything, like it really has an impact on me emotionally. And I mean, I wish, and this is funny, I wish that I could detach from that, but I also think that it would make me a significantly less good coach if I did detach from that, because I do think that a big part of being a great coach is being, emotionally invested in your athletes and in their results and their wellness and all that type of stuff. So I guess the whole point of all of that is like, yeah, I mean, when taking on an athlete, like I consider all of those things because it's not an easy decision, because I know that if I do say yes to someone, that it means a pretty big time.
You're all in. You're all in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
You're diving. It's not something I'd be like. It's kind of like what I said with the East Africans when I start working with them. I'm like, this isn't a partial thing like this. It's either 100% or nothing. And I mean, that's the way that I approach it, and particularly with professionals, because it is their livelihood, it's their profession, it's their passion, it's incredibly important to them. So yeah, I want to make sure that if they're all in, I'm all in. But that's another thing. I want to make sure they're all in as well.
Of course, yeah. It's equal commitment.
Yeah.
Now, when I want to touch a little bit on before we go to some of your basic your training, kind of the way that you're working with your athletes on a yearly, 4-yearly cycle, depending on Olympics and everything else.
Yeah.
Are you somebody? Would you say you're coming from the side of larger miles, or you just look at each athlete individually? How are you kind of, I guess, periodizing a year for each athlete?
Yeah. Well, I guess first of all, I'm really big into periodization. I really believe in polarized training, both on a macro and micro scale. So, within the year, I definitely make sure, and I definitely preach to my athletes that there's times where you need to be taking it easy, and we definitely go through those rest periods. And some athletes, like, that's no problem, as like they're like, oh great, so you want me to drink beer for the next month and do nothing? Then no problem. Whereas other ones, after 2 days, they're like, oh, sorry, I just went for a 200-mile bike ride yesterday because I couldn't help myself. But anyway, making sure that, they go through that, but also, polarized with it, like even on, within weekly and monthly cycles, where our high intensity sessions are certainly high intensity and our low intensity sessions are, aerobic. And once again, as being an athlete, oftentimes getting people to go slow or go light is the most difficult thing. They want to go hard all the time. But I would say, on a yearly cycle and in general, I am a believer in volume. I definitely think that the foundation and building that foundation and building that aerobic base is hugely important, no matter who the athlete is. As an athlete gets older and longer into their career, those phases can be shorter, and I can do a little bit more like block periodizing or even reverse periodization sometimes with those types of athletes. With younger athletes, I'm a huge believer in building up that foundation and that base.
And then keeping that foundation. I mean, do you keep that kind of that kind of work going? Yeah.
Yeah, in a sense I do. I guess what I like to do is build up a big enough foundation that then what we can do is we can add intensity to that foundation, and for them to be able to maintain most of that foundation while adding that intensity without getting broken down, and obviously without getting injured as well. So yeah, for me, especially for Ironman racing, like that strength, that foundation is huge. And I think, we talked about this earlier, your ITU guys that, transition to Ironman training, I think that the ones who do have success, like recognize that, strength is so much more of a factor, and having that endurance and everything is really huge. And some of the guys that, don't address that end up not being as successful and or getting injured, and hurting themselves and everything. But in general, you always wonder what you look like from the outside. And I guess the feedback that I get from my athletes is that it's hard. So that training is hard. And it's also, and this is hugely important, while I do have some fundamental, core philosophies such as periodization and the polarization, and also, really stacking some volume and some strength in, throughout the season. And also, I guess, another key component of that is as we get closer to a race, we add more and more specificity to what that race is, of course. Everyone is an individual, and what Sam Long and what Ben Hoffman do is different. Like, once again, core principles are similar, but Ben's in the latter stages of his career. He's incredibly established. He has this giant foundation. Sam is, still, a young dog, being trained, and we have to work on very different things. All the way from technical stuff, you still have to work on that type of stuff with a guy like him, and form and technique. But also, building him a little bit more gradually, actually having him do, lower intensity, but longer stuff. Because like with Sam, like a good approach with him is, I'm thinking long-term with him. And, he's had a really great last couple of years, but I really think that it's still, once again, I'm not pleased with what he's accomplished with yet. And I shouldn't be, and he shouldn't be, because he's just starting to scratch the surface. And, and it's hard to tell a 25-year-old kid that, because, he wants the world and he wants it now. But
I know your job as a coach at 25 is just to pull the reins in.
Exactly.
I want you to be in the sport for your golden 30s. So let's get to 30, 31, because that's when the true magic really starts happening. So let's just pull that. Yeah. And
that's what with Sam, I'm like, listen, like you can win Kona like many times, like multiple times. I really think that that's possible. And, but I'm like, but it's going to take time, and that's not going to be the goal, like initially here. And we need to, could we do that? Could we push you to these specific limits and push, these buttons and try to do it in the next year or two? Yeah, we totally could, but it wouldn't be best long-term. And like for him, I'm thinking long-term, whereas, once again, flipping to Ben, this is the time we're pushing all of those buttons.
It's on now. It's on now. Yeah,
exactly. It's full on. And Ben's also in that mental state where he is, and he knows that. Like, COVID was an interesting year, because it's the same thing. There's two different approaches, and people, like, this is funny, because talking about these two athletes, we had very different conversations in March with these two athletes. With Sam, I'm like, listen, you're young. You won a few good races last year. You're not totally relevant yet. People don't totally know who you are. You have boundless amounts of energy. You have tons of potential. Let's drill it. If you're good with continuing to drill it, like, let's put a bunch of carrots out there this year. And as if you followed Sam's year, and that it's a collaborative effort. What do you want to do? What do I think you should do? So, well, I want to, do these Strava KOMs. Awesome. They're high profile KOMs. People get behind that stuff. But, Sam didn't, it was a good year for him to develop himself as an athlete and develop himself in his career. And his batteries are on full charge, and he has tons of them. So, he, like I said, he has boundless amounts of energy. So it was a really good year to take advantage of that. And he did, he really put himself out there. He had a phenomenal year. He raced really well. He was gung-ho the entire year. And and he finished his season in Daytona, which was actually, it was an afterthought race for him, but he ended up doing pretty well. And of course he made like about, 2 million rookie mistakes, but that's the way that, he still is. And after the race, like, and it's funny because Sam, this is the way he processes things is, sometimes I'll be like, well, do you think that maybe you should have done this? And, or did you forget to do this? And he'd be like, no, I don't think so. And then 2 days later, he'll be like, you know what? I totally forgot to do that. So it takes him a while. But anyway, he ended up ultimately, but like I said, immediately after, Daytona, like once again, he's rip roaring and ready to go, and I'm like, okay, let's take a little bit of downtime. Let's really plan a cognitive, 2021. Whereas Ben Hoffman in contrast, in March, he's got a new baby and, relatively new, his wife had, Josie, their first, daughter.
Kelsey.
Josie she's, I guess she was born a month before Kona in 2019. So, but Ben's later in his career, and I'm like, he's incredibly established. He has, his giant goal, and one goal is to win Hawaii, and is to win Hawaii now. And I think, for me, I was like, let's make sure those batteries are fully charged for 2021 when you're going to be in Kona, and let's do what it takes to get you there. And so, so Ben's approach was like, well, I'm going to be a lot more conservative, and I'm going to spend time with my family. And that is how Ben recharges his batteries. So, his approach was very much more the established, he's an established pro. He has nothing to prove. You know what I mean? The thing that he has to prove is, he wants to win Kona. And so we said, well, what is the optimal way to get you, to Kona in 2021? And that was more by him keeping a low key year last year and really focusing his energy. And I think it paid off because now, I told you earlier on our call that I talked to Ben earlier today, like he's back he's full on Ben mode again, you know what I mean? Which is intense. And, but it's great to see because, last year was almost, it was a bummer, and he loves racing as much as anyone does. But I do feel like it was a great opportunity for him to recharge his batteries. So there's two different athletes, that I work with who, had two very different approaches to last year. And it was both based on, their personalities and where they are in their careers. So, it's kind of important to look at them each that way. And that's how I approach each athlete is, kind of.
I love that. It's such great illustrations of optimizing each person, where they're at in their careers and dealing with COVID and the emotions that went with that. It really is fantastic to just hear you talk about managing all these varying personalities, varying sports, varying ages, and how you're able to do that. I just think it's fantastic. How much are you involved in an athlete's actual racing, pacing? Do you sit down with an athlete before a race and say, look, race, conservatively here, and then attack here, or do you just let your athletes go and do their thing?
No, yeah, we usually do a lot of planning around that. And it's because I feel like more so than ever, there are a lot of tactics involved. And then obviously planning a race around, certain people's strengths and their weaknesses and, all that. But no, very much so. We go into races, like I say with each of my athletes, with pretty specific race plans. Yeah. And it's very rare. If it's a 70.3 race that they're just popping through on their way to another race or something like that, sometimes it's like, hey, pull the gloves off and do whatever you want to do today, and let's see what happens. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or we have a plan, and the plan is to do something unconventional, and and to see how that works, or use that as a learning opportunity or something. But the big races, they're usually, well, almost always, there's pretty good analysis on who's in the race, how's this likely going to play out? How's this going to, play into your favor? What do your numbers look like right now? What do they need to look like in the race? From calories to power to pacing and all that type of stuff. Ben in 2019, going into Kona, we knew that his run was spot on and better than it had ever been before. And Ben historically, had biked, pretty hard and often with the front group. And in that race, he was like, the big thing that he wanted to prove to himself in that race was that he can run with the fastest guys in the world. And he normally had, but, in that race, it's a risk to take, but I would say, he almost held back a little bit on the bike than he normally would have. But then he had, the second fastest run split of the day, and he was only 20 seconds behind, Jan's split, and he ran himself through the field and, had a phenomenal day. And the value of that to us in that race, and especially to me as a coach, is Ben all of a sudden he's like, he's like, holy, I can run with anyone in this.
He now sees himself as a runner.
Exactly.
It's a mental shift.
Like, no one thought of Ben Hoffman as being like a runner, and now he's ran the fastest marathon on a legit distance course of anyone ever in the sport of triathlon. And I mean, that's, to me, like, that's phenomenal. But it was the one piece of the game maybe that it was going to take for him to win Kona. And now he has that both in his physical wheelhouse, but also in his mental wheelhouse. And so, to me, that was an incredibly valuable, but I mean, I guess, the point of that is, it was at least partially a cognitive decision to make sure I wanted to build up his confidence in the run so that he didn't feel like he had to overbike, and to put himself in a position on the run. I wanted him. So, and I think it worked out well. And then, of course, as like not long after that, he went to Ironman Florida and ran that incredibly fast run split. So that was really good, for him.
It's empowering. It's empowering when you've got a weapon. It's one thing to be strong across all three, but to know you've got a weapon in your back pocket, and that weapon be the run. I always think it finishes off the race. So if you've got it as a weapon, it is. Yeah, I remember, when I was looking at building, started training myself a lot more, and I started doing the math and really looked at every race in the world and who was winning, and it really came down to almost 90% were getting won by the runner, the guy that I was like, well, hang on, the math is in front of you. And I remember changing a lot of the way I approached my training to go, you got to be the best runner in the world. What's it going to take? And for me, that was doing a lot of work on the great Arthur Lydiard.
Lydiard. Yeah, I love Lydiard. Yeah, he's one of my.
Yeah, well, it sounds like anybody that talks about long endurance miles tends to love Arthur Lydiard.
I have a great Lydiard story real quickly. I saw him speak, I don't know, this is a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And his thing was, and I can't remember who it was, but one of his superstars back in the day, like Peter Snell or something, he was like, and he said he would do this with his athletes, and it was to emphasize his point. Is he said, if an athlete and a young pro runner came to me and said, hey, I want to train with you, he would say, great. For the next 12 months, go run 120 miles a week every week for 12 months, then come back and we'll start talking. And I thought that was really funny. And of course, that's not the way he approached things, but he was just emphasizing that he really was a believer in, these young guys had to have this big foundation to maintain health and then strength, and then ultimately to get really fast. So, yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Peter Snell. I mean, he won the 800 meters in, what was it, 72 or 76? I can't remember.
Right around there. Yeah.
Won the 800, wasn't known for his finishing kick.
Right.
But it came out that he was running 20-mile runs at best easy pace. So 32 kilometer runs at best easy pace under 2 hours, which became my staple, as I talked about with Chris McCormack last week, became my staple every week, even for Olympic distance. I wanted to know I could sprint 10K off the bike. And that became the go-to, and just developing the pace got faster, but it stayed easy. And that was my whole mindset for a lot of my training. And don't get me wrong, I think there were times I probably did need a coach to pull me back a little bit. It would have been good to have you in my corner, go, Greg, you're going too much. But,
exactly.
But when it's working, you're like, this is all perfect. Look, I've kept you so long, but there's, I wanted to talk about, gosh, I've got a list of things here, but I've enjoyed just really getting to know you and your journey and your process. I think we could have dived in a lot more into, the science of it all and your approach. Yeah. But I'm going to have you back on for all that. What do you think?
I love that. That'd be fun. We can, we still have some reminiscing about the old days to do as well. So,
there we go. The next one will be reminiscing and science. No, but it has been fantastic. And I really want to congratulate you on all your success, both in your own career and now serving and helping others. I think it's, there's not many that have been able to do what you're doing, both. I think you and Siri Lindley, it's funny, you both shared a room back at McKeely Jones's place in 98. You've gone on to both have successful careers of your own right, and then you've gone on to coach Boston Marathon champions, world champions, and you both become two of the great coaches of the world. So it's interesting that you've both been able to put that together. So congrats on doing that.
Yeah, no, thanks. Well, I mean, ultimately too, it just shows you how small, this is the center of your universe and it's the center of my universe. But ultimately it's a pretty small world. We live in these relatively small universes, but I think that's a great thing about this sport is that we are ultimately really pretty tight and really close to each other. And I mean, it makes it special in that way. So it's nice.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and having you on. So thanks for coming on, mate. Really appreciate it. Now, how do people get in touch with you? Bolton Endurance is your big coaching platform.
Yeah, you can of course we have social media accounts and on Instagram, it's at Bolton Endurance. I personally, I'm not insanely active on social media. I do have social media accounts. And so I'm at Coach Ryan Bolton on Instagram. But and I mean, if you just Google Bolton Endurance too, it'd take you to our website. All our contact information.
Perfect.
And everything's on there. So yeah.
All right, mate. Well, thanks for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening. Now, if you want to find more about Ryan, I'll have all of the show notes, timestamps, the sponsors, coupon codes, and all the links are going to be at bennettendurance.com/media. So you'll be able to find all the information there. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. And Ryan, thanks for your time, mate.
Yeah, Greg, thanks so much. And it's always good to see you, and I hope Laura and the two kids are doing well.
Oh, we're doing great, mate. All right, stay on the line.
Thanks a lot for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, your support would truly be appreciated. You can visit the Patreon page, or you can subscribe with your podcast app of choice. Don't miss the next episode, so subscribe and be notified. For show notes, if you want to know more, please visit bennettendurance.com. I'm Phil Liggett, and on behalf of Greg Bennett, here's to the next time, and I hope you will join Greg again very soon.